Phil Kantoff grew up in New York City before entering the 6-year medical program at Brown and spending the first few decades of his career as scientist, oncologist, and physician leader at Dana-Farber and Memorial Sloan Kettering. Now he's taking a turn as CEO of Convergent Therapeutics, a clinical stage startup company bringing a new approach to the deployment of radiopharmaceuticals to treat and possibly even cure certain cancers, beginning with prostate. In this episode of the HealthBiz podcast, Dr. Kantoff shares the fascinating results of Convergent's work and he discusses the potential to combine Convergent's technology synergistically with existing treatments. He's also a diehard New York sports fan, but if he does cure cancer, I will forgive him. I'm your host, David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group. Enjoy the show, and if you like what you hear, please do hit that like button. Well, Dr. Phil Kantoff, co-founder and CEO of Convergent Therapeutics, welcome to the HealthBiz podcast.
Thank you, David. Great to be here.
Yeah, you've done a lot of really interesting things in your life and your career. We'll talk about some of those. We'll make sure to leave plenty of time for what you're up to now. I wonder if we could start back toward the beginning and just ask about your upbringing and any childhood influences that have stuck with you throughout your life and career.
Yeah, thanks for asking, David. Probably my parents were my biggest influence, not surprisingly. My father went to City College in New York City, and my mother went to Hunter College, and they were. My mother came over from Vienna, and my father was born in the United States, and they were both very motivated toward education. My father went on at City College to win the science medal at City College, and so he was very science oriented. My mother was very education oriented, so they had a very big influence in my life.
There's no mean competition. Any Nobel laureates or anybody in your dad's class at City College?
No. In his class.
Yeah.
I think Arthur Kornberg was in his class.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of.
Yeah, for those that don't know City College, I mean that was the place, So.
That was the place if you had no money in those
Exactly.
days and you wanted to go to a good school, right? Hunter College, very similarly, was a great school as well. So my parents had a big influence. My friends, the friends you pick are very important in life, and we were all sort of marching the same direction. We would be very motivated in school, and after school we would play basketball for hours. So we help each other along. And then finally, one of my teachers in high school, my biology teacher, was very influential. He was fantastic. He was maybe 5 to 10 years older than us, very young and super motivated. And he got me very interested in molecular biology.
Uh-huh.
And the early molecular biologists became my heroes. People who went into molecular biology in the 1940s, 1950s. And my dream at that time was to become a geneticist. And in fact, I look back at my high school yearbook and what do you want to be when you grow up? It's geneticist.
Yeah.
So.
Good. Well, that's a good one. I don't know if there are any people who are saying, buggy whip manufacturer or something like that, but you hit it more closer to the future and closer to the mark, I think, than most.
Right.
So, how did you always know you wanted to be a physician?
I didn't. As I said, I thought of myself as becoming a scientist, and in fact, a lot of my career was as a scientist. But when I was in high school, when you applied for colleges, I made the tour, and I went to an interview at Brown College, Brown University. And the person I interviewed was the head of admissions. And we had a great conversation, and he said to me, "Why don't you apply for the 6-year medical program?" And I said, I didn't really think about going to medical school, but when I came home, my parents, obviously said, "That's a good idea." So I applied early decision to Brown to these 6-year medical program, and all of a sudden I was a few years later in medical school.
Yeah. Yeah, that program. I remember that program when I was coming out of high school, and I had a friend that actually had did that program. Um, there aren't many like it in this country, anyway. As far as I know, is it a good way to go? Do you think?
It was good for me. I don't know if it's good for everybody. It really trimmed off 1 year
Yeah.
in the process. I did consider MD PhD programs, but yeah, there are a few programs that still exist. I think they were a little more popular back in the days when
Okay.
I was applying than they are now. And it does, speed your way to becoming a physician or a
Yeah.
scientist.
Now, how about oncology? When did you figure out that that was going to be your calling?
Yeah. So I actually thought, David, that I was most interested in cardiology. And the reason for that was I did my residency training at NYU Bellevue, and cardiology was a big part of what was going on at that time, and oncology wasn't as popular. And I planned to go to the National Institutes of Health and do if you will, a postdoctoral fellowship there in molecular cardiology, which was basically a new field. But the person that I was planning to work with at the NIH took a sabbatical for 2, 3 years. So I then found my way into molecular hematology, where I did my postdoctoral fellowship. And I really, that's where I did my molecular biology and fell in love with molecular biology. And that steered me in the direction of oncology. And then I applied to clinical oncology fellowships, and I then landed at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston.
Got it. That makes sense. So my connection with the NIH is I did grow up in Bethesda, and a lot of my friends and lab partners, in biology and chemistry and physics, or parents are both MD, PhDs that worked at the NIH, and so I always did great in science, but I didn't always understand as well as I would have if I really had to struggle through it by myself. So maybe that's why I ended up in business.
Uh,
So I want to hear a little bit about Dana Farber and about Memorial Sloan Kettering, but just before we do that, sort of big picture, you've been in the oncology field for a long time. Like, how has oncology changed since you came out of the 6 year medical program at Brown? I mean, if we look back at those times, how has it changed, and has it changed just sort of the way the rest of medicine has changed, or there's different things about oncology compared to, let's say, cardiology, which you didn't end up doing?
right. So as you know, surgery and radiation have always been the mainstay of treatment in oncology. And they've evolved, they've gotten better through the years, but the area of medical oncology, which is, we'll say, the administration of drugs and therapies to patients, was really nascent at the time that I entered into the field in the 1980s. One of the big breakthroughs, a couple of big breakthroughs, was the treatment of Hodgkin's disease, which
Mm-hmm.
preceded my entry into oncology, and also the treatment of testicular cancer, which was an amazing revolution. That really basically occurred as a result of I'll say, discovery of cisplatin and the addition of cisplatin to other chemotherapy agents. But it, it was pretty sparse at that time,
Yeah.
in terms of the options. And those were the two big things. And then there were some advances in chemotherapy with drugs like Taxol and the taxanes. But the big revolution really came, two big revolutions came. One was the revolution of precision medicine, as we now call
Yeah.
it, with, I think, two advances in the late 1990s, early 2000s. One was the realization that amplification of HER2/neu was a driver in breast cancer and potentially a therapeutic target, and the development of Herceptin, which has saved many women's lives with HER2 positive breast cancer, and also the development of Gleevec in the context initially of chronic myelogenous leukemia, which when those two things happened, it seemed like precision medicine was going to be the thing.
Yeah.
And it has made a major impact in oncology, but it's not, not every disease is like CML and
Right.
Gleevec.
I mean,
So
Herceptin and Gleevec they're great breakthroughs, but that wasn't yesterday.
that wasn't yesterday, right? It
Yeah.
was a long time ago. And, there have been incremental improvements in the care through precision medicine with genomic sequencing and precision medicine. And the next big breakthrough, of course, was the development of we'll say immuno-oncology, and
Yeah.
specifically the development of checkpoint inhibitors, initially CTLA-4 antibodies, and then PD-1 and PD-L1 antibodies, and they have made a significant impact in a number of diseases. But once again, it's the test case there was melanoma, and there have been tremendous advances with checkpoint inhibitors in melanoma, less so in other diseases, and almost none in some of the major diseases
Yeah.
like uh, colorectal cancer, very infrequent benefit, and prostate cancer, an area that I'm
Yeah.
particularly interested in. We continue to march forward, and I think immuno-oncology and precision medicine will continue to move forward, but we need
Yeah.
other tools in order to treat cancer and potentially cure cancer, even when it's advanced.
Great. So I want to make sure we leave plenty of time to talk about your current activities. So we're going to gloss over your, 3 decades at Dana-Farber and Memorial Sloan Kettering, just by saying, you kind of eased your way up the coast to Providence from New York, and then you made it to Boston, and then you regressed to New York for a little bit. That's how I see it, sitting here in Boston. Would you see it the same way?
Well, David, I'm a New Yorker at heart,
Yeah.
so I root for New York sports teams. I know you hate to hear that, but if it's the Yankees, Red Sox.
Everybody has some kind of a weakness. Now I know yours.
So there was something natural about me returning to New York after being at the Dana-Farber for 28 years, because I felt that draw to New York. And Memorial Sloan Kettering is a fantastic institution, as is Dana-Farber, and I had a fantastic time growing up, and then taking on some leadership positions at Dana-Farber, and then doing the same at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And within the past year, I returned back to Boston for personal reasons. I got married, and I had been commuting back and forth to Boston from New York, and we tried to make things a little bit easier and stay in one city, and that's
Good. Well,
now what-
congratulations, and whatever it takes to get you back to Boston. So kudos to your spouse for that one. So
Thank you, David.
good. So let's talk about Convergent, and I'd just like to hear about, first of all, kind of the founding story. Why did this company have to come into being in the first place?
Right. So the founding of the company preceded me, and it's based on work that was done by the founder, Neil Bander, who's at Cornell. And he has been particularly interested in prostate-specific membrane antigen for a number of years, and developed the first-in-class and best-in-class antibody against prostate-specific membrane antigen, PSMA. And he had been working on it for a number of years, and then decided to make it into a company and license it from Cornell. And before I started, the company was formed in late 2020 as Convergent Therapeutics. I joined in July of 2021 as the chief executive officer and chairman. And it's been a fantastic 9, 10 months in a completely different world.
Yeah.
I really, I explored, David, a number of different opportunities in academia, in pharma, and in biotech, but I was drawn to this company because of very exciting preclinical and, more importantly, clinical data that had been generated before I actually started. past year has been really terrific, learning how to be a chief executive officer, driving the building of the company. So it's been a good experience.
Great. So let's talk about what it does. You mentioned before that there's been a lot of advancements, some breakthroughs, but we're far from kind of curing cancer, and there's all sorts of requirements that are needed beyond just kind of incremental approaches, even these very exciting fields of personalized medicine, immunotherapy, and so on. So what's the focus of this company? What's the sort of technology that you're dealing with? What's the unmet need that you're addressing?
Just want to clarify one thing that you said. Cancer is curable if caught early enough and treated appropriately at that time. And in fact, in some diseases, most people are cured. But in many diseases, as you're pointing out, when the cancer escapes the site of origin, it becomes incurable. And sometimes precision medicine or immuno-oncology is not enough. So,
and by the way, Phil, I'm happy to be corrected on that point. So,
okay, I'm sure you are. We all know people who have lived through cancer and have done well, and that's a real testament to the advances that have taken place over the past 50 years. So, Convergent is based on the concept that radiation is one of the sort of mainstays of therapy in cancer, and what we are trying to do is deliver radiation throughout the whole body to attack the cancer wherever it is. It's not a new idea.
Yeah.
It's an idea that's been around for a while, and it's an idea that's been successful in some settings so far. The difference of what we're doing is, number one, we're using an antibody approach. And most of the other people in this space are using small peptides, ligands that bind to specific surface molecules on cancer cells. We're using antibodies. The second major part of this is the transition now from the use of beta particles, which are high energy electrons, to alpha particles, which are helium nuclei. And as you can imagine, helium nuclei are much bigger than
right.
our electrons and are much more powerful and travel a shorter distance, so there's less collateral damage from delivering alpha particles. The advance here is the advance in this context is the recognition that a radioisotope called actinium-225 is sort of an ideal alpha particle emitter. Mm-hmm. It has a half-life of about 10 days. It emits 4 alpha particles. So very powerful, and with precision delivery is very active. The other part of our technology is the recognition preclinically, that is in the laboratory, that combining antibodies directed at a specific target, such as PSMA, will enhance the uptake and delivery of the radioligand, which is the beta particle attached to the peptide. So there's opportunities for synergy of radioligands and radioantibodies, alpha particles, beta particles. So I think this is a fantastic area of development. And I would argue, much like the sort of the early days of precision medicine, the early days of immuno-oncology, this is going to become a big field. And I think a lot of people are recognizing that right now.
Terrific. So it sounds like you've gone from preclinical to clinical development, if I understood that right. And so where are you in the development process? What's the development plan?
So we've conducted a single dose escalation study in patients with far advanced prostate cancer, which would, you'd figure that prostate would be our first
right.
target. And remarkable results with regard to responses in a very heavily pretreated
Right.
group of patients and very far advanced patients. The first study that was done clinically with actinium-225 attached to the antibodies was remarkable, and that was presented at ASCO last year. We've then now gone on to do multiple doses, and the data looks even better, as one would anticipate. And right now, we're in the process of refining the dose
Mm-hmm.
and the schedule of administering the antibody actinium to patients with advanced prostate cancer. The other strategy that we're doing is this combination strategy,
Yeah.
combining it with radioligand, but also combining with other active agents that are used that would be compatible, if not synergistic, with the radioantibody.
So it sounds very promising, and it also sounds complicated from a development standpoint. And I wonder if you could comment on how the type of development you're doing, of a radiopharmaceutical, but also with one that looks like you're looking in combination, with other agents. How does that differ from like a, sort of plain Jane typical drug development process?
Well, I think it's very similar. I mean, the difference here is a bit around the supply chain.
Yeah.
Where do you get the actinium-225 from? Where do you get the antibody from? But getting antibody is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Sourcing actinium-225 is a bit more of a challenge, but where there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
The Department of Energy has realizes that actinium-225 is going to be a big thing, so they're ramping up their production of actinium-225. But what's happening is the private sector is moving into this space as well, and there are many companies that are beginning to develop the means to produce actinium-225. So that's really the more complicated part
Yeah.
of this.
Okay.
But it's fundamentally the same as any drug development
Yeah.
process, which is you start in oncology in patients with advanced disease. You try to find the appropriate dose and schedule, and see if you have sufficient activity. And we're in line to do a registrational trial in men with advanced prostate cancer, but at the same time moving into earlier stages of disease, where you might have a bigger impact, and in
Yeah.
fact may potentially cure patients if you go early enough.
Got it.
So that's all part of the picture here. And in addition to that, interestingly, PSMA is expressed in the microvasculature of other solid tumors other than prostate cancer. So it's conceivable that this approach will be applicable to a much larger range of other solid tumors. And finally, our goal is also to develop the radioantibody platform of combining antibody against the surface molecule combined with actinium or the appropriate radioisotope. So, there's a lot to do,
Yeah.
and it's a very exciting space to be in right now.
That sounds good. Now, since your arrival, I've noticed a few collaborations being announced on the website. Can you say a little bit more about what those collaborations are about?
Um, Well, I know about two collaborations I think that you're
Yeah.
referring to, and one is with a company called Ionetics, and
Mm-hmm.
another one is with North Star, and those are two of the companies that are in the business of developing actinium-225.
Got it.
So we want to make sure that we will have a supply going forward of actinium-225. The other collaboration is with Point Pharmaceuticals, which is a radioligand company,
Uh huh.
and we're collaborating on the combination approach of radioantibody and radioligand. Yeah, I think as a startup biotech company, you want to create as many associations as you can to create as many opportunities going forward.
That makes good sense. You mentioned the supply chain challenge. Of course, everybody's talking about supply chain, whether it's potato chips or anything these days. But I think in radiopharmaceuticals, supply chain's always been an issue, and sometimes there hasn't been domestic supply. It sounds like that is more on the agenda for the Department of Energy and for private parties here in the U.S., if that's right.
Right. It's the same things. Other radiopharmaceuticals have faced the same issues, and as I said before, where there's a will, there's a way, and people will find a way to produce the isotope. Lutetium-177, which is the beta particle that's commonly used. Same issues confronted it, 5 years ago, but companies came up and created a supply.
So, it sounds extremely promising. It doesn't take much to understand why this would be useful if it continues to work as it has been so far. And at the same time, it's been a really tough time to fund biotech companies of any type. And I wonder about how the company's funded and how the market is affecting your plans.
Right. So we were fortunate to have angel investors and marketable securities, which we cashed in to fund our company. And the clinical trials so far have been conducted at Weill Cornell as investigator-initiated trials, which takes a lot of the cost away from the company. So we're about to enter into a Series A in, as you say, challenging times.
Yeah.
We're very optimistic that we'll be successful in raising the money to broaden the scope of our clinical trial portfolio. These are challenging times, but when you have something as active and as safe as this therapy, I think that it will be well funded.
Great. Okay. Well, good luck with that, and I hope it does work out well for you.
Thank you.
Now, you've had a extensive career on the medical side, including a number of leadership roles and supervising probably many more people than you're doing now. But being a CEO of a private company is a different animal, and I wonder, have you had that as something that you wanted to do? Had you looked at it, this kind of opportunity in the past? Why become a CEO, and why now? Besides, it's of course a very compelling opportunity. It's something you're well familiar with.
Yeah, I never woke up one day and said I want to be a CEO. That was not my goal in life. In the academic setting, which I spent, as you know, most of my career, my aspiration were to do the things that I did, which was run programs, run a lab, run departments, mentor faculty, and promote faculty, and create vision for directions for whatever program or institution I was involved in. So I'm now going from a department of 500 faculty to a startup company with 4 people in it.
Right.
And honestly, this is very exciting for me. This sort of brings me back to the early days of when I joined the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute as a junior faculty member, and being in charge of creating the vision, creating the energy, and motivating people around you to do what we want to do. It's a very exciting opportunity for me.
Great. Well, I wish you the best, because it takes plenty of energy, and not just nuclear energy, to be CEO of a startup. So I look forward to following how it goes. Let me just close up by asking you a last question about, if you have time for reading, anything that you're reading, anything you would recommend to our listeners.
So, David, I'm disappointed to tell you that I'm not much of a fiction reader.
Okay.
I enjoy reading science and journals and whatnot. I spend most of my time reading that. From the hobby standpoint, if you look behind me, you can see the album covers of some of my favorite bands. So I'm a big music fan as well. And finally, I've with COVID, I've been binging on these series that I never watched before, like Mad Men
Yeah.
and Breaking Bad, and when they were going on, I said I don't want to watch that,
No.
but like right now, it's a fantastic way to spend your time. So I apologize for not being a novel reader, but that's the way I spend some of my casual time.
That's fine. Well, we don't have to apologize to me since I'm not a novelist, but it sounds like you have a full life and good hobbies. What is any favorite bands?
Well, I've always been a fan of rock and roll. Actually, one of my favorite musicians right now is Joe Bonamassa,
Okay.
who is a fantastic guitarist, and I've seen him about 10 times. I track him around the country.
Great.
But I have a pretty broad taste for music.
Nice. Now, does he know you're tracking him? Does he have a Geiger counter or something to keep up with you?
Right. He's picking up the actinium 225 around me.
Exactly. Well, we'll leave it there. So, Dr. Phil Kantoff, co-founder and CEO of Convergent Therapeutics, and much more. Thanks for your time today on the HealthBiz podcast.
Thanks so much, David. Nice meeting you.
You've been listening to the HealthBiz podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.